This is episode 4 of The Uncomfortable Couch. Today's topic is communication. In this episode, we discuss how healthy relationships are directly linked to healthy and effective communication styles. We also gain a better understanding of how our communication methods have been impacted by our parents' communication methods. Lastly, we learn how to deal with people who don't communicate in a healthy way. Let's go now to our conversation. Today is the second installment of conversations that Ben and I are having about relationships. This is one of my favorite topics, actually, communication. In my own experience and from what I've seen in other people's lives, communication is kind of a skill set that relationships are defined by, and I've seen relationships live and die based on the effectiveness of a couple's communication styles. So, starting out, I wanted to get your take on why communication is so relevant in relationships. Can you kind of give us the definition of communication and talk about its relevance?
Definitely. I think you're right on. I think that it is absolutely a pivotal bedrock issue in relationships. I think the reason for it, if you think about it, why communication is so important in relationships, take it a step further or a step back from that, a step beneath that. What is the purpose of relationships? How do relationships thrive? What makes a relationship thrive? What makes a relationship grow? What studies are showing now is the best way to think about relationships is bonding, connecting. And how do you connect? So much of what makes a good relationship is when you're with someone. You've been in relationships like this. This is the difference between relationships that last and don't. When someone sees you, knows you, and still wants to be with you, and then is there for you throughout the course of the relationship. They're there to meet your needs. You're there to meet theirs. You know them, they know you, and it's like you join lives and you sort of become intimately bonded and connected. How do you do that? You communicate. How can I let you into my world if I can't communicate what's going on within me? How can you let me into yours? How can you talk about the way that I've upset you or the way that you remind me or trigger me in my feelings from my past? How can I do that if I can't communicate it? If all I can do is just show you that I'm pissed, we're going to have a hard time making that work. If you can tell me, look, this is the reason that was so hard for me, is I grew up in a family with this, and the way that you did that affected me in that. It reminded me of that feeling, and that feeling came up again. It was really hard for me.
Mm-hmm. I remember one of my professors describing it as each of us are at the unique psychological center of our own existence. So communication is kind of like what you said, a doorway into this is my reality that I am. It is uniquely centered to me. Right. Let me try to convey that through words.
Exactly.
To you.
Through words, I'm going to allow you into my heart, which is sort of a Valentine's Day card way of putting it. But if you think about it, that's really what relationships are. We're going to integrate our lives together. How can we do that if we're not sharing what's going on inside of us? I think one of the reasons why communication is sometimes, I don't know that it's really undervalued. It is really pretty much one of the most important things in relationships. But if it is undervalued, I think one of the reasons for that would be people who don't really value or don't really recognize the importance of what's going on inside of them, and just sort of think that a relationship should be two people that just get it and we just enjoy each other and we have fun and it all is smooth and don't realize that the ultimate purpose of this is to let this person into your inner world and for you to be able to do the same for them and to be a part of their inner world and then to impact it, to get that you're going to become a part of my inner world and I'm going to be better for it. And I'm going to become a part of your inner world and I'm going to engage with what I find there in a way that makes your life better. What could be more intimate and better than that? But how could I do that with any sort of effectiveness if I can't communicate what's going on in me or if I can't communicate what I experience as I interface with what's going on in you?
Do you think that people's communication methods are affected by the way that their parents communicated or their parent communicated with them and with each other?
Well, definitely. At the simplest, you can say that communication is learned. You learn how to communicate by what you see and your experiences with communication. So absolutely, your parents communicating will have a huge impact on at least your raw materials. And some of that I think is just genetic, even that your parents pass on some of the raw materials of communication, just in the way that verbally your brain works, your ability to communicate things. But so much of it, I think, it goes all the way back to the conversation about overregulating and underregulating. So much of it has to do with what you're taught about the value of your inner world, the value of what's going on with you. Do I care? Or when I tell you that you got to go do something and you look at me like, oh yeah, but that doesn't work for me. And I just say, it doesn't matter to me. I really don't care about that. Whatever's going on for you is not nearly as important as what's going on for me. We can teach our kids the value of themselves. And so that will have a huge impact on how I communicate, what I do with what's going on inside of me. Do I share it? Do I believe that? And so much of communication is looking inward and picking and choosing, okay, what do I share here? What do I value? It's like we're going through the thrift store of our brains and we're looking at, and this shirt, I would never wear it. And we just bypass that one. And what about this thing? What's valuable in this store and what will I give you? Our parents teach us. They're like the baseball card Beckett. They're the ones that give us a sense of what to value in us. And when they continually looked at your tears and said, dumb, put it away, you're not going to be nearly as likely to at least naturally have the raw materials for sharing your tears with your partner. If they always want to hear about your grades, then you're going to be trumpeting your performance with stuff quite a bit. You learn what to value, and what you value is what you'll communicate. That's at a deeper level. A lot of it too, though, is pretty simply just skills. Active listening, the ability to listen to a person instead of just thinking what you're going to say as soon as they're done. The ability to engage with a person and just reflect back that you understood what they were saying and that you're on the same page. Those kinds of things are super important too, and our parents pass it down. So yes, the long and short answer is absolutely. Our parents affect so much of who we are, and communication is a huge thing that they pass down too.
I remember last summer when I was living in Spain, one of my best friends over there is from Slovenia, and we would come over to her house on the weeknights and sometimes she would be in the back room Skyping her mom, and it always sounded like they were in a screaming match. We would ask her roommate, like, whisper in the other room, what's wrong with her? Why is she fighting? And then 5 minutes later, here comes my friend, and she's smiling, hey guys, how are you, blah, blah. And actually that was just their communication
That's just
style.
what we do.
It sounds a little bit more, intense or aggressive than...
And you'll see that not just in parents, but cultures. Some cultures, the way they communicate is loud and emotional. Others, it's very subdued. And if you communicate exactly how disappointed you are with a look, and that's all that you need, or the way that you spread the jam on the toast, that's all I needed to say. And okay, got it, Mom, thanks. Yeah. It's just different cultures, the way that we handle it, which is a pretty cool thing if you think about it, just the mosaic of the human experience and how varied it is.
Even within cultures, there's several subcultures. The way we communicate in my household is going to be a lot different with its little tweaks and whatever than the way you guys communicate.
Right, so, and we grew up 2 miles away from each other.
Exactly. What would you say the difference is, if there is a difference, generally speaking, between the communication styles of different genders?
Well, there's no hard and fast. Not everyone will fit into any sort of generalities, but in my practice, I work with a lot of couples, and the most common is pretty stereotypical. The most common pattern that I see in communication is the withdraw, pursue, where it's typically a wife or a girlfriend or a female partner will be upset about something and will try to communicate it and go into the middle, the shared space in the middle, like the space between us. I will enter into it, and it's sort of like I'm coming closer to you and I'm inviting you into this conversation by pursuing it with you, right? And a really typical, and it's an unhealthy cycle that partners will fall into, is that then often the man will withdraw and just say, for whatever reason, I'm not doing this. Whether it's I'm incapable, I feel insufficient, this makes me feel insecure, I don't know what to say, I'm not interested, I really don't care. The man will back away, which causes the woman to pursue even further, and which will cause the man to back away even further. And that could become cyclical to where often and this is a broken down communication cycle, but if it does break down, that's often how it breaks down, is more communication from the woman than the man wants, and less communication from the man than the woman wants. And so it can end up being this like perpetual chase where I'm constantly talking to you about how you don't talk enough and you're not engaging with me, and you are constantly trying to get away from me because you're talking to me so much and you're trying to get me to engage and communicate so much in this way. So neither one of together that can add up into a cycle that can lead couples pretty far away from where they just naturally would fall into this, like one of them screaming, the other one's slamming doors and storming out. And but yeah, I think that typically the stereotype, at least, is that women are more effective at verbally communicating and than men. I think there's been I've heard studies and I've heard counter studies talking about how the linguistic centers of a woman's brain are more developed and that they have more language ability. Just simply, I have more words. Like the Eskimo, the number of Eskimo words for snow. Us Kansas kids, we have like 3: sleet and snow and whatever. But the Eskimos have like 20 words, and apparently there's some sort of carryover there that women have just more words to describe what they're going through and what they're experiencing. That's been my experience personally, but whether or not that's true for everybody, I've also seen studies that say that the difference is actually kind of marginal, and maybe it's more culture, maybe it's more of training. We accept the amount of verbal activity from our girls in a way that we don't ask for it from our boys, maybe.
What do I do when I am in a relationship with someone who has very unhealthy communication styles? So in my own life, I have been in a relationship in my past where this person had very unhealthy communication styles, and very, I guess it would be underregulated communication styles, very aggressive, just from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds, a lot of reflexes. So what do you do if you are in a relationship with someone who has very, in your opinion, very dysfunctional communication styles? And then what do you do if you are the person with the inherited and learned dysfunctional communication styles? Are you just a hopeless mess, or can you work on things?
Mm-hmm. And that's really the question. That's really the question that you have to ask, and that everybody at some point has to ask within their relationships, is, can we work on this? Because it takes work. If the nature of the differences is so profound that it just seems like we're just not a good fit for each other, it's better to know that sooner than later. And that can happen. To me, I wouldn't say, you'd find people that it's just impossible, but I think that you could find couples where you could say that is going to be really hard, and it's going to take a lot of work.
Why? Because their communication styles are so different, or they're dysfunctional? Either,
and yes and yes. Just the natural. Like sometimes you can have inverted communication needs, where it's like my strengths and my weaknesses are perfectly aligned in opposite to your strengths and weaknesses. So I'm really good at, let's say I'm really good at, not even necessarily good, but let's say I will let people have it, and I underregulate, and I will get really loud.
You're good at being assertive.
Let's say I'm super good at being assertive, and you are super good at keeping your head and not talking when you don't think it's productive, right? Or let's just or in the frame of weaknesses, let's say my weaknesses, I just have no filter, and your weaknesses, you do not engage at all. together, that's going to be a really hard mix. You can work to bridge those divides. Communication is learned. It takes hard work. But it can be done. That's what we work on. I work on with couples in my office all the time. One of them is breaking the cycles that grow. Because when we have our inverted needs and my need for silence perfectly meets your need for loud, when those things happen and I respond the same way to this thing in you, that you respond the same way to the thing in me, and we keep doing that over and over and over, it becomes reflexive. Or if you're bringing, because of your past experiences and your past hurt, you're bringing reflexes to this relationship that are prior to me, and you're already ready to explode on me before I've even done anything.
What do you mean by that? You said you're bringing reflexes into this relationship. So
Yeah.
Prior to me, what does that look like?
So let's say your reflex is when you're mad, you explode, right? And you bring that in even before me. I might not handle your emotions and your anger well, but you are already ready to explode on me. Even before I've blown it, that reflex is already in place. Like maybe the relationship that you were referencing, to where those patterns are already laid down. That reflex is already established. So it doesn't really even have anything to do with me. I didn't create that. But at the same time, or on the flip side, you can create reflexes in your partner too, to where if you keep responding to me this way, eventually I'm going to skip the whole song and dance that gets me up to the place of exploding. And you just say one thing and I'm ready to explode. Or vice versa. If you keep exploding on me over and over and over, I'm going to skip the trying to talk about it or trying to just like hope that it'll clear out. And the first sign of you being upset, I'm leaving. I'm going to the garage. And so those things to break those cycles takes work. And coincidentally, the work is communication. You communicate what's actually happening for you, why you're so angry, why you flip out so quickly, why you want to leave so easily, why you want to withdraw, what's happening. You communicate, I'm withdrawing because I feel like I don't know what to say to you, instead of just withdrawing. You communicate, I'm exploding because I feel like you don't listen to me, instead of just exploding. You break that cycle and you do something different with it. And for a lot of people, Josh, that those patterns are so rigid and they've been laid down so thick that they need help. They need to go sit in an office with somebody and say, pull this apart for us, like manage some of this stuff so that every time, because what happens for a lot of people is they try to do this. They try to communicate well, but when they do, they fall into those cycles. And before you know it, they're screaming and they're slamming doors and it's not effective communication anymore. So sometimes you need a third party to sort of sit down with you and say, okay, hold on. Let's slow this down. Let's look at this and let's get to work.
My hope is that the function of this podcast can kind of help people with that. Some people who either don't have access to a counselor or therapist, psychologist, or people who don't want to go, they're reluctant, or even people who are going. Hopefully this can still give them some wise counsel in that area. And lastly, Ben, do you have any resources that you would recommend to people who are wanting to either improve their communication or work on communication in their relationship?
My favorite book about communication is called Hold Me Tight by Dr. Sue Johnson, which is, I think the tagline is like 7 conversations for couples. But it basically, so much about communication and about effective communication is guiding people through the process of really honing in on what it is that they actually have to say. What is really going on here? What's beneath your explosion? What's beneath your storm out? Why aren't you communicating effectively? What happens inside of you that sparks the reflex that derails the communication? This book by Dr. Sue Johnson talks about a lot of the common ones, a lot of the common reasons that people stop communicating effectively and what they do instead, and how you break some of that, what you do, how you can break down these cycles of ineffective, broken communication so that you can actually let someone in, so that you can actually allow them to be a part of your life. And instead of the reflexes about how you've handled that sort of interface or the pain of that process in the past, or that being done poorly with you before, and allowing that to affect your partner now, being able to talk about what's going on, which that's the beauty of it. The beauty of effective communication is that you can actually communicate about what keeps you from effectively communicating, which can then, when you can communicate and you can talk and you can connect at that level of what's difficult for us, you're actually doing the very work of allowing that person into your life and you becoming a part of theirs, which is exactly what it's all about. So even poor communication in the right hands or with the right attitude can be an opportunity to communicate well, and from there can be an opportunity to bond and to form that closeness that it's all about.
That reminds me, I think the best advice that I ever heard about communication was when I was working at the Center for Behavioral Medicine. And once a week I would meet with a psychologist and kind of talk about how things were going, because I was dealing with people who had really intense mental health backgrounds, pedophiles, and people who had murdered other people. In my meetings with the psychologist, one thing that she would reiterate to me over and over again was, Josh, I want you to strive to identify the emotional affect of their message. I remember one day there was a lady, she was responding to internal stimuli, and she was hearing voices that were saying that there was a bomb in the wall that was going to go off, and she was freaking out about it and screaming and whatever. And after we spent some time talking to her, it turns out that the emotional message behind that was anxiety and fear and panic, because actually she was being discharged the next week. And someone who, unfortunately, when you're buried under very densely layered mental health symptoms, it's hard to communicate like, hey, I'm freaking out right now and I'm losing my mind because you're about to send me out. So anyway, all that to say, I love the advice that you gave, and I'll have to check out that book. But I think it's for our listeners, remember to try and identify the emotional message behind what your partner is saying. So it's like the expression, if the girl says that everything is fine, it's probably not fine. Something like that. Like, I pay attention to the emotional message of what they're saying.
Because the emotional message in everything is fine is, I don't think you want to hear what I have to say, and I don't think that this is going to go well, so I'm going to go ahead and skip it. But I'm going to skip it in a way that I really hope you'll see, and that you will tell me, and that you will see from me, hey, look, I can tell something's not right. What's going on? And then I'll pursue you. So I'm saying it. So I'm with you 100%, Joshie. I think that the emotion takes you into that internal space so much more than thoughts do, or trying to craft a thought and say, this is my point. So much more than that. What's going on within a person, to become a part of their inner world is to hone in on how are they feeling, because we communicate our feelings. We communicate especially our primary content, the stuff that's really going on beneath the surface. We communicate it all the time. We just don't even always do it with the right words.
That concludes this episode of The Uncomfortable Couch. Join us next time when Ben and I discuss infidelity. What makes cheating so attractive, and why is it so common? I'm your host, Josh Munyon, thanking you for joining us here on The Uncomfortable Couch. We'll see you next time.